Next up, we have a talented brand strategist. She's a personal growth and leadership coach. Today, she's going to talk about the need to break free from social pressures. Please welcome Simran Anand.
My name is Simi, and before we get into all the serious stuff later on tonight, I want us all to take a quick trip down memory lane. Are you guys down? Say yes. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So I want to wait before this needs to come on first. Is this going to be on? There we go. Okay. I want you guys to close your eyes with me for a second. Do it. And I want you to transport yourself back to your childhood, back to a time when life was so much simpler and your confidence was as natural as breathing. Now, I want you to actually picture it. You're in a time machine going back to when you were 10 years old and it's Christmas Eve. And you are so happy. You're just chilling in your living room, surrounded by your family and your friends, and you're having the time of your life, right? And all of a sudden, you suddenly get this extreme burst of energy. Almost like you ate way too much candy and now you have a sugar rush. 10 seconds later, my friends, your entire living room is transforming into a stage of America's Got Talent. And you and your cousins are hitting dance moves like Michael Jackson and singing high notes like Taylor Swift, and your entire family is looking at you like you're absolutely crazy. But the thing is that at that very moment, you don't care. Why? Because at that very moment, you feel the most confident, the most alive, and the most fulfilled. When we were this age, doubt rarely crossed our minds. I mean, when we had an idea, we pursued it. When we wanted to do something, we did it. When we wanted to say something, we said it. And when we wanted to become someone, we became them. I remember in 5th grade, we had this day called Vocabulary Day. Have you guys heard of this? Maybe not, maybe yeah. Basically, every single student was assigned a word, right? And then they had to embody this word through a costume. Now, the word that I ended up getting assigned was ecosystem, which, let's be real, that is not an easy word to turn to a costume, and it's really, really boring. But did that stop me? Hell to the no. So, you want to know what my mother did? She's right there, she'll remember. That night, my mom went to Walmart, bought a plant, attached it to a paper crown, and plonked it on my head. I looked absolutely demonic. But the thing is that at that very moment, I didn't care. And that next day, I strutted onto that stage as if I was the coolest, badass girl in the entire school. And what's intriguing is that even though this memory was like 11 years ago, I still remember the feeling like it was yesterday. I wasn't worried about what my friends were thinking of me, if I looked too stupid or too crazy or too much. No, I was so at peace with myself, and everyone around me felt that energy. Now, why on earth am I even sharing these stories with you? I'm sharing these stories because each story symbolizes a time in our life when self-doubt, self-criticism, and self-judgment was non-existent from our self-image. And instead, our self-image was defined by 3 words and 3 words only. You can see them right here: courage, creativity, and curiosity. When we were kids, we were like these little sponges, always soaking up knowledge left and right, and always so curious. We never questioned what was real or what was possible, because our imaginations were so active, and so was what we strive for. And let's not forget, we also weren't afraid to dive into the unknown. Like that day we tripped the training wheels off of our bikes for that very first time. Or that day that we learned how to stand on our own 2 feet. We weren't afraid of falling down. Why? Think about it. Because we were so curious to learn how to stand up. But somewhere along the way, my friends, something changed. We grew up. And growing up meant that we slowly lost touch with our inner child. And this happened very unconsciously. We didn't even realize it. But suddenly we ended up finding out that we played for that very last time. And we dreamt for that last time. And that was because our brain started to prioritize efficiency. We wanted to seek what was known and what was familiar, even if that meant sacrificing our curiosity. But what we didn't realize was that by sacrificing our curiosity, we ended up compromising on so many unique qualities that once made us special. And that, my friends, is what started a war against ourselves. A war between practicality or imagination and between safety or boldness. that's exactly what happened to me. In 2012, a year after Vocabulary Day, my entire life took a turn for the worst. It was the summer before middle school, so my family and I decided that we would take an epic cruise to the Bahamas. But what we didn't realize is that that trip would turn out to be far from epic. Now, when I came home, right, I started having these excruciating, horrible stomach pains. I mean, I had no clue why. Every other month consisted of me going from doctor to doctor, from hospital to hospital, just so that we could try to figure out what the hell was going on with me. But we had no clue. So, a few months later, I ended up finding out that on that trip, a sinister parasite had infiltrated my body and left me allergic to every single food known to mankind. Gluten, dairy, eggs, soy, nuts, you name it, I was allergic. I ended up losing 20 pounds in the span of a few months. And I went from being a girl who was so bold and outspoken and expressive to a girl who was so shy, insecure, and socially anxious. I remember these boys at school would go out of their way to make jokes about the lack of curves that I had, and that made me so anxious. So you want to know what I did? It sounds embarrassing, but it's true. Every single day when I would go to school, I would take my backpack and hide it over my butt just so that no one could see how I looked. That is how insecure I was in myself. Now, if you think back to your middle school or even your high school years, you'd probably agree with me when I say that our number one priority, and I mean it, our number one priority back then, was to feel like we belonged, to feel like we fit in. But why on earth was that so important to us? Like, think about it. The answer is simple, and it ties back to a psychological concept that's called belongingness theory. It's very simple. We don't have to overcomplicate it. It basically means that we as human beings all have this primal desire to feel like we belong, to feel like we're accepted, and to feel like we have community, right? And so if you look at that chart right there, when our most basic needs are fulfilled, like food, water, shelter, safety, etc., 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 that is when our natural inclination next is to seek belongingness and community. And in this day and age, it's very easy to have this. I mean, we have social media at the tip of our fingertips, even though some could say it's making us more isolated, which an entire different conversation for another day. But if you were to rewind the clock, right, and if you were to think back to our ancestors, the reality was so much different. Why? Because survival was a daily challenge. And so in order to overcome the threats of nature like predators, they had to stick together. They had to function as a team. They had to cooperate. Why? Because that meant higher chances of survival, having kids, and then passing down their genetic legacy. So when I talk about fitting in or belonging, it's not just a teenage insecurity or a social construct. It goes so much deeper than that, because fitting in and belonging is ingrained into our DNA as a survival instinct. And that is why we as kids, we all subconsciously knew that if we stood out for the wrong reasons, whether that was through how we looked, or our behavior, or our appearance, whatever it is, that we would feel isolated and left out. And that's a reality that none of us wanted to experience. But for the majority of my life, that was the fate I did experience. And at first, it was only about body image, something that I can guarantee you every single one of you has experienced. But when I got older, there was this new issue that started to emerge. And that was my cultural identity. You see, I was born in Miami. I went to a school that was predominantly filled with either white or Hispanic students. But then there was me, this awkward, insecure brown girl with the butt as flat as a door and a really obvious unibrow. And let's be real here. Like, let's be totally real here. When you're young and you're different, that doesn't earn you a badge of honor. Kids aren't walking around school wearing t-shirts that say, be yourself and love yourself. It's entirely the opposite. And I know you're smiling because you know it's true. Why? Think about it, why? Because kids at that age don't have the emotional intelligence to value diversity and inclusivity. They probably don't even know what it even means. I didn't. And what makes it worse is that when kids are conditioned by the biases of their environment, like their friends or their family or their teachers, that is what perpetuates a cycle of racism and injustice that we see today. I remember this kid named Jared is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. He would throw statements my way, saying things like, why do you people wear this unusual dots on your head? And I remember, he said this one thing I will never ever forget. He said, does being Indian mean that you people were part of the 9/11 terrorist attacks? The moment those words came out of his mouth, I felt this instant wave of shame throughout my entire body because in just one split second, my friends, his words had the power to make me feel completely ashamed of who I was. My ethnicity, a part of my identity, something that is permanent, something that I cannot change. And the sad reality is that this goes so much deeper than what I'm talking about, and it didn't end with their childhood. Have you guys heard about this story on social media? Some of you, yeah? So last week I was scrolling on Instagram, because what else am I going to do? And I came across this story that completely broke my heart. Earlier this year, there was a 23-year-old girl named Jahnavi. Jahnavi was studying at Northeastern University so that she could get her master's degree and financially support her mom who was living in India. But on one normal day, as she was just crossing the street, a speeding police officer crashed into her and killed her. Now, the sad reality is that this happens every single day, all the time, especially in marginalized communities. But what makes this incident so tragic and heartbreaking is what one of the other officers said at the scene. He said, "Oh, just cut her a check for $11,000. She's 26. She has limited value anyway." Now, we could spend the next 30 minutes together and talk about how effed up this is on so many fronts, but we're not going to do that because the lesson behind this story is plain, simple, clear. And that lesson is that it is absolutely impossible to end the war against ourselves if we can't even end the war against each other. And that is why we as a community, as the future leaders of this generation, we have to create a more conscious society that values diversity over discrimination and dignity over devaluation. Do we agree? Yes? Awesome. So I want to reflect on this idea a little bit deeper. Bear with me because it goes deep, okay? So I want you to imagine two kids for a second, okay? One kid was born with dyslexia. Do you guys know what that is? It's hard to read, it's hard to write, right? The other kid was born with no legs and one arm. And even though you and I both know that these conditions are so different from each other, I want you to take a moment and ask yourself, what do you think both of these kids have in common? What are some universal struggles that both of these kids could experience that bind them together? Just take a moment and think about it. Maybe you're thinking not feeling good enough, right? Or not feeling smart enough, feeling inferior, feeling like a burden to society. And that's true, and there's many more. But here's the thing. Both of these kids were born with something special. They have something so special. Guess what it is? Both of these kids were born with amazing communication skills, which is an attribute that has been proven time and time again to lead to way more personal and professional success than just being a 4.0 GPA student who went to Harvard. Like, let's be real here. But the sad reality is that for the majority of their lives, both of these kids couldn't acknowledge this gift. Why? Because their identity was defined by their diagnosis, not by their individuality. Now, if you take a look at some of the most successful people in this world today, you would realize that most of them, if not all of them, went through some kind of adversity, some kind of challenge, or some kind of insecurity at some point in their life. Walt Disney had dyslexia. Look where he did. Look what he became. Billie Eilish has Tourette syndrome. And Stephen Hawking had ALS. But what separates these people from 99% of this population is one simple idea. And that idea is that they chose courage over caution and creativity over conformity. Do we agree?
Yeah.
And that is why in every single story I've shared with you here today, whether it's personality insecurities, or body image, or cultural identity, or discrimination, or disabilities, or et cetera, there's probably many more. There's a common theme among all of them. And that theme is that our differences are actually the source of our greatest strengths. But in order to tap into these strengths, we first need to reclaim our individuality. Because even though we know we're all limitless, as great as that sounds, we still live in limitation. So how the heck do we do that? I got you. It starts by making the unconscious conscious. So we're going to do a quick exercise, but please actually do it because it will help. I want you to take a moment and I want you to think to yourself, what is a fear or a doubt or a limiting belief that is holding you back right now, that you just aren't confronting, but it's there? Just take a moment. Maybe it's, I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. Or I'm shy in social situations. And those are all valid. Now, when I was doing research for my TED Talk, I came across a statistic that completely blew my mind. And it basically said that the #1 fear ranked among 75% of our global population is the fear of public speaking. It was even ahead of death and spiders. And as completely surprising as this is, I wasn't fully surprised by it because honestly, for the majority of my life, I was so scared to use my voice. And I really do mean that. I'm not saying it to make you feel better about yourselves. I was that girl where if you put me in a situation where I have to talk to a stranger, I wouldn't be able to do it. I was that girl who, as I'm talking to the stranger, I'd pretend like I got a phone call and I would have ran out of that situation as fast as I could. And even though people on the outside looked at me and they thought that I was confident and charismatic, on the inside, I wasn't at all. But here's the thing. I want you to think about this. When you were a baby, right, and you shat in your diaper, were you afraid of screaming at the top of your lungs in the middle of the restaurant so your mom could change your diaper? Yes or no? Please answer it. No, right? No, absolutely not. Why? Because babies aren't insecure. And it's because they haven't yet learned what it means to feel inadequate. And that is my point. Our fears aren't a symptom of our genetic blueprint. Our fears are a symptom of our societal conditioning. And it started when we chose to accept the opinions of our environment as gospel. I mean, think about it. When our friends or our parents or our teachers, let's talk about our parents, because that had an influence. When they told us to shh or think before you speak, we internalized that. When our friends jokingly said we were too much or too annoying, we internalized that. Because that is what we do as kids. We attach meaning to external stimuli so that we can make sense of the world. And that is why at the end of the day, the biggest war you will have to face is the war inside of your head. Every single day of your life, you will have to learn how to make the unconscious conscious so that you can actually see if your fears or your doubts or your insecurities are grounded in truth or if they're just part of the survival mechanism that's trying to keep you safe and in the familiar. Now, the moment that I fully realized the power of this was the moment that my entire life changed, because I realized that I didn't have to let all the words that I wrote in the previous chapters of my life define the person that I want to be, because I realized that I hold this pen to my life story. And at any given moment, I could choose to stay the same, or I could choose to grab a book, turn to a next page, and start a new chapter. A chapter that is defined by the person I choose to be, not by the person the world convinced me I was supposed to be. At the end of the day, my friends, ending the war against yourself isn't a one-time event. It is a commitment that we made the moment we were born on this earth as human beings. But just like how technology in our environment and our social culture evolves every single day, so do we. And what makes the evolution easier on ourselves is when we realize that growth is simply a reconnection to our inner child, that curious, creative, and courageous version of yourself. So spend more time reconnecting with that version of you, the version of you who never viewed life in monochrome and always appreciated the colors and the variance in those that surrounded you. Because it's in that reconnection that you will unlock a whole new level of human potential, my friends. And that, my friends, is when you're one step closer towards ending the war against yourself. Thank you.